late. The day before, right? Don't worry, I understand. Just know it's a lateral view of the eye, and you're going to, with 75% probability, have a diagram like that on the test. And how I do it is, remember, I do not give you a bunch of arrows. I require that you put the arrows in. If I'll count all the structures that I want. Definitely, I want this many. So I count them and I subtract one, and that's how many I ask for. And frequently they're half a point each, and sometimes I even make them a point each. Now, I intentionally take away these arrows because I had one young man, it was with the eye, that I had a really good diagram, and this one young man comes up to me and he says, "Did you try to trick us on the test?" And I'm like, "What? That's the best diagram I ever had, I found on the internet." And he goes, "Oh, but you had one extra blank." And then I realized all he had done was remember the sequence and never once looked at where it was pointed. And when the one on the internet had one extra blank, he got all the rest of them below that blank wrong. I sure as heck wasn't giving him any half credit for that, right? Holy mackerel. So what I do is I give you a diagram, and you give me, you label it, and I say give me exactly 14 structures or whatever it is, right? If that's 15, I'd say 14. And now if you gave me 17 to prove that you know, I tell you, I'm not trying to be a hard butt, but I was going to say hard ass butt, but I didn't until then. And so, don't give me 17, because if you miss one, I'm docking you. Give me what I'm asking. If I see any mistakes, I can't call it 100. Oh, you got 100. What am I going to subtract? You gave me 17, you missed 3. What? That ain't no 100. Give me 14 if I ask for 14. But you want to give me 17, I respect it. Go for it if you want. Believe me, I'll just smile. I like it when you do it. I like it when you take that chance just to show what you got. But you better not miss anything. You'll be all right. Give me this diagram. And by the way, everything you see there in these notes, in this packet, I don't have all of this described. I don't necessarily have an optic disc. I do actually, but I don't have some of it described. Sclera, the white of the eye. Man, I want you to know what each of those terms is, what each term means. I certainly expect you. I have a lot of diagrams up here, and I do have some notes. I pulled them from a compilation. This happens to be from Campbell, and I pulled some from Martini because Martini does the best job of any of the texts at giving the diagram of this breakdown right here. Man, you see this? You see this right here? You've got these chambers and cavities and segments divided by... This is the place that is least consistent in anatomy that I've ever seen. When I was teaching in labs at Penn State main campus, I was the coordinator, and Jim Strauss, the fellow whose website you're going to have, brilliant dude. He was 1 year behind me. He's a dear friend of mine, truly is. I was looking for the best website on the Google or on the internet for the anatomy, and I find this great one, and I see, oh, my alma mater, PSU, and then I see Strauss. I'm like, what? You know, my good friend Jim. I would have been at his wedding if I wasn't in France. He came over and visited. He used my road to graduate. This guy has the best website for this kind of stuff. You're going to be using it. Well, he and I, when we were graduate students, we had the hardest time with this. It's because the texts are inconsistent. And I want to tell you, there's no more inconsistency than I've seen with labeling these cavities and chambers and all of that. So we went back, he and I went back to Gray's Anatomy. And Gray's Anatomy, it did not start as a TV show, folks. Gray's Anatomy was the Bible of anatomy. My sister gave me my edition before you were born. Gray's Anatomy, man, it was the authoritative text of anatomy. There are others. Did you know Gray's Anatomy was the authoritative anatomy text? We just knew it was a TV show. What is this world coming to? Well, as far as the diagrams are concerned, the very best diagrams medical illustrator that ever lived Oh man, dude was Frank Netter, MD, Frank Netter. You can still get his drawings. They come in this black book, about that tall, gold. Oh my gosh, he was real good. They used those drawings in med schools for the longest time. They were better than photographs. You can still get them if there are things in question. So we go back to Netter, we go back to Gray's Anatomy. We tried to work this out. I tell you, let me tell you the problem. First of all, you're seeing some things here. Anterior chamber and posterior chamber, this is great, of the anterior cavity. Now Martini here, which typically is not the #1 anatomy and physiology text, but rather #3. Tortura and Derrickson is like tied with Merriam for #1 in the English language for nursing students and all. Martini's right there, a distant third, but not so distant. Certainly a good book, really good book. But this, Martini does better than anybody else, I think. Make that clear. It's just, let me show you. You've got the lens here. It's dividing a space from behind, posterior space, from an anterior space. That posterior space, you can call it, they call it vitreous chamber. You can call it chamber of the vitreous body, but men really hesitate to use that word chamber here. Never, ever call that the posterior chamber. Never call it the posterior chamber. But I'll tell you something. If you get that same author for that Kaplan biology thing, they just might do it because they're not very good. You got to know the truth here. I'm trying to give you the truth as compiled from all the major sources. This is the posterior cavity, but the best probably term to use for it is posterior segment. But segment doesn't say much to you. So I really like how Martini called it posterior cavity. Yes, it's okay to say it, but never ever call it the posterior chamber. Then in front of the lens, you've got what's called the anterior segment or cavity that subdivides by the iris into the anterior chamber of the anterior segment. And this black space here is the posterior chamber. You see where my finger is? And I tell you, not every professor and not every author of a Kaplan, whatever, knows that. This is splitting a very precise hair. But it is a fact, it's not my opinion. I was not even born when it was arrived at. But that space behind the iris and in front of the lens is called the posterior chamber of the anterior segment or cavity, and don't you forget it. And if there's ever a discrepancy, back away if you have an opportunity to not be, if you don't have to be confrontational, back away. But you're right if you do it this way. And that took Strauss and me a while to figure that out. We're like, what? And that was good English, by the way. It took Strauss and me a while. Just to figure out what the experts were really saying, what the anatomists were really saying. Superficial view, you just get one text, and that one text just might be off. We're having fun. Don't talk about zombies. But they're real. People do get out of the grave.